Hello and welcome to The Pouch, the Stage 42 COVID restrictions of podcast that aims to take a not-so-serious look at the week in Australian news and politics. I'm Greg. Wow, the view is amazing, exactly 6 kilometres from your house. Savage.
And I'm Jake. Is that a hard lockdown in your state, or are you just really unhappy to see me, Farr-Wharton? On today's episode, we talk borders, premiers, and keeping on keeping on.
And Jake, speaking of keeping on, and while we're as snug as a bug in this proverbial rug, I want to know, what are some of the lesser-known restrictions placed on Victorians during their Stage 4 lockdown?
Spoiler alert, it involves a Mars bar, a donkey, and soda water. That's a bit obscure.
In that order?
Yeah, exact order.
That little nugget of inspiration for that joke came from. I was watching the premiere, right? Everyone's glued to their television when they can to watch Daniel, see whether he's got North Face on, see whether he's got the suit on, see what sort of what the mood is going to be like for that particular day's press conference. Of course, the premiere of Victoria. And
also Melbourne.
Yeah, whole region. I think he's the Premier of Australia at the moment.
Well, there's a new story number 3 or 4. We'll get to that.
What I wanted to mention was the fact that on whatever it was last week or whatever it was, and I was sitting there watching the television and I was watching these announcements about these Stage 4 lockdowns, and I was like, okay, I'm trying to keep up with what was happening, with what he was saying. And he's going, and then at one stage he says, if you are on a building site, if you work on a building site and the building has more than 3 levels, then or 3 stories, then you're allowed to do blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I'm so checked out. Like I am so... Yeah. Who decides this stuff? Like in such a short time, who went, well, what about buildings with more than 4 stories? And they went, well, that's an important one. They write that down.
Yeah, it's really crazy. They did the same thing in Queensland over the last fortnight during our internal ructions, where we've had the potential of clusters popping up thanks to some interesting individuals who decided to go travelling and come back through a hot zone. And the building site ones were really weird. So you could have exactly 3 contractors working on a house,
right?
Or in a bigger development, you could have more than 3 people, and there was a set limit. It's just there's so many. Guys, if you communicate clearly and specifically to each industry, like there's no point in doing a press conference and talking about every single one of the rules. Direct it, like have a website. Click here if you're a contractor. Click here if you're working on a large development. Click here if you're a cafe. That sort of stuff. And that way at least we have gone down to a tremendous amount of detail. All you need to do is go to the website and click on your profession, and you will know all of the rules specific to you, and you will be able to shelter yourself from all of those rules that just don't affect you.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Like at some stage, you sort of just switch off from the whole sort of, however many cases there are per day and all that sort of stuff. I did see a Chaser article which said something along the lines of, man's mood, purely determined by the numbers in Victoria. And I think that's kind of true at the moment, Like I think if you get that notification and it says that you're up to 700, or someone messages you and said that they've had 700 in the day or whatever, like you're just sort of you're a bit disheartened, really. It's sort of a bit sad, because at first we were all in it together. Yep.
And now it's all them.
Now, Jake, I want to start today by spinning the wheel of non-East Coast, the non-East Coast wheel. So
I love it.
Yeah. So what we've done is we've created a wheel, and it's got all the states that aren't on the East Coast of Australia, because we are a little bit biased towards the East Coast here. So let's just
and territories as well, we should say.
That's right, and the territories. Let's name them just so that people can remember what they were.
So you got you've got Victoria, you got South Australia.
No, I think we're going to stick with Victoria being on the East Coast.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, Fair enough. Doesn't have any East Coast, but I get what you're saying.
I don't think so. East Coast.
So it's got South Australia. It's got
I'm going to have to
Australia.
rename the wheel, Jake.
South Australia, Western Australia, and Northern Territory.
Canberra?
Where? Yeah, okay, all
What's
right.
that one? No,
but
ACT?
Canberra's like right in between New South Wales and Victoria.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to have to really rename this wheel. Okay. So Western Australia, South Australia, Northern Territory.
Yeah.
I'm going to put ACT on the wheel as well.
Okay.
All right,
Well, should we also put Tasmania? Like, I know that they see a lot of the East Coast as well.
Yep. Jeez. Nearly lost all our viewers from rural Tasmania there.
Almost. From Texas?
Texas and New South Wales. Now, okay, or is it in Queensland? Is Texas
Queensland.
in Queensland? Queensland, sorry, Texas.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, it's Baghdad.
Baghdad is in
Tasmania.
Yeah, there's definitely a Baghdad in Tasmania, which is hilarious. And then there's a Texas in Queensland.
Yep.
And there's others.
Yeah, there's others.
Okay. All right. 12 minutes in, Jake. We haven't even got to any of the news.
Well,
Okay, I'm
we
going
had to rename our wheel of non-East Coastal news.
All right, I'm going to spin the wheel. I don't think the viewers can see it at home, Jake, but that's okay. I'm going to spin it. All right,
Okay.
ready? Oh, and it's landed on Western Australia. Well done,
fantastic.
Western Australians. Oh, Western Australians. All right. So, Jake...
It does occupy a large slice of the wheel, given
really
that it is a large state.
Yeah, everything's in proportion on the wheel.
Yep.
On the wheel of whatever the hell it's called. Now... Okay, so we're gonna. I want to know about Clive Palmer, Jake. I want to know about the situation with Clive Palmer and what on earth is happening with the Western Australian border. I even resorted to watching a Friendly Geordies video on the Western Australian Clive Palmer situation. So I have a very yelly, screamy type of view on this situation at the moment. But I don't fully understand what the situation was. I was hoping that Jordan Shanks would explain it to me a little bit, but he just sort of ranted and raved about Clive Palmer. So tell me a bit of background. And
the Friendly Geordie guy has a bit of an interesting storied history, you might say, with Clive Palmer.
Okay.
He was sued by Palmer, I think,
for
referring to him. That's right, yeah. Referred to him as, I can't remember whether it was bald or fat or something like that,
fat.
but either way, yeah. Anyway, so we won't resort to anything like that. But yeah, look, Clive Palmer has launched a couple of weeks ago a challenge against the Western Australia border, the hard border closure that Western Australia has with, pretty well all other states in Australia.
Okay.
But of course, Western Australia is one of those very large mining areas, and it has very rich mineral deposits throughout. And one of the I suppose mainstays around mining now is that people, that we have our FIFOs and our DIDOs, our fly-in, fly-outs and our day-in, day-out workers who just travel to do their day of work or their week of work or whatever it is, and then, travel back home. But the nature of the world at the moment is that with hard border closures, those working in all of the non-Western Australian states and, are unable to go to their Western Australian roles to be, to work as in their mines. And same, vice versa. If they're currently working in those states, they can't get back to their other states for fear of not being able to return. So,
and this has made Clive, it's ticked him off?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether Clive actually owns any mines over in Western Australia or has the prospect of owning mines over there, or is just being a great global citizen for all of those miners around Australia who want to do their job and see their family too. But either way, he launched this challenge, and very quickly the Australian federal government got behind that legal challenge to the Western Australian border closure.
Right.
And so added you might say a significant amount of weight to that legal challenge. But earlier this week, the federal government decided that they would withdraw from that legal challenge. And
why? Why, Jake?
Well, essentially, it's just not in the spirit of the game of things.
Right.
It's just one of those things that is not done.
Is part of the premise that they the government have been pretty good at allowing states to make their own decisions along the way, and they sort of maybe felt like it was a bit too heavy? Is that part of it, do you think?
Look, it's possible that that's what it is. I would say that, along the way, the federal government, certainly certain ministers have targeted the premiers of those states anytime a sustained border closure has been enacted. For example, there was the, multiple attacks from Peter Dutton on the Queensland Premier and the Queensland government because they had their hard border closure.
Right.
But, essentially it seems to have done exactly what it meant to do, which was keep COVID out and keep the state operating. You've seen similar things with Victoria now. Everybody's criticising, everybody's piling on Dan Andrews now.
It's fun to do, Jake.
Well, exactly.
You just
We've
bounce
got more
back
stories
from his
about that.
North Face puffer jacket anyway when you pile on.
He has, yes.
It's like a big trampoline.
But yeah, it is really interesting. I do think that there was an element of so-called states' rights. The federal government perhaps shouldn't be getting involved in this. But of course, the federal government.
I just think where I've gone wrong is I actually thought that the government was supporting Clive, but the government are supporting Mark McGowan. They're supporting Western Australia.
Well, previously the government was supporting Clive.
Right.
Previously the government was supporting Clive, and earlier this week when they pulled out of that legal challenge, they decided, nope, we're going to tell Clive, buddy, cancel it. Stop it. Stop it. Okay? Please? Stop it. It's just not cool. Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Finance Minister Matthias Cormann urged Palmer to drop the case. Yes.
Okay. All right. And Mr. McGowan, I've got a story here on ABC News, which is from 2 days ago. Mark McGowan urges Scott Morrison to back fresh trial in Western Australia's coronavirus border fight with Clive Palmer. So the key points are that the federal government has withdrawn its support for Clive Palmer. The Western Australian government wants the case vacated.
Yeah.
You could vacate a case. And a new trial ordered. The Commonwealth is no longer a party to the case.
Yes.
Christian Porter said. Okay.
Yes, the Attorney General. Yeah, look, it is an interesting
So now
one.
it's pile on Clive.
Well, I don't know that it is pile on Clive. It's just, if Clive's going to do it, he's going to do it, and he will do it.
Yeah.
But the federal government won't get behind it. Essentially, the federal government's doing a little bit more of that whole, somewhere between states' rights, and it seems to be working in Western Australia. So let's just let them do what they need to do.
Yep. Okay. All right. That's good. And just as a side note, Jake, while I was on the news website ABC, there's a very important story on here. It's a trending story. I thought, well, what are people listening? What are people reading this morning? And it's got here: Jackie and Temujin are in love, but face judgment and criticism for their age gap. So really hard hitting news there.
Yeah. How old is Jackie? And how old
Jackie
is Temujin?
61, and Temujin is 27.
Wow, yeah. Temujin is a great Alaskan name.
Yeah.
Indigenous Alaskan name.
Okay. Well, I didn't know that. How do you know that?
There was, Temujin. It's a Mongolian name.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Mongolian name. Yep.
Anyway, so there you go. They're facing criticism for their age gap. Meanwhile, Clive Palmer.
Is challenging Western Australian borders.
He loves it, doesn't he? He loves a good court challenge.
Loves a good challenge. Loves a good. Your microphone is doing a bit of a.
Oh, is it crackling, Jake?
Tickly bickly boo.
Has it calmed down?
It has stopped.
Excellent. Will you keep me updated on
It
that?
has ceased and desisted.
I'll stop bumping it. I wish I was as confident with Clive Palmer as going to court and doing all these things. Like it just seems such an easy process for him to follow.
Yeah, look, I think it has to do with a number of things. Number one, his wealth.
Are you saying I'm too poor to go to court, Jake?
Well, I'm just saying that he's a lot less poor than either of us combined. Over the next 50 years of earning money, he's still got a tremendous amount more.
True.
So look. the fact that he's got quite a bit of cash, the fact. Look, I do wonder whether this is Clive being a good global citizen and trying to open up things for miners in general, or whether this is a thing that he does actually have interests in Western Australia that he's trying to open up to. But it is one of those things that he is challenging, and he may not win. It's probably not a strong case, but because look,
he loves publicity too, doesn't he? Like he loves the show.
Well, this is the other side of things that he did announce this week that there will be a number of Palmer United Party challenges in the Queensland Parliament elections later on this year. So, potentially this challenge, although it has absolutely nothing to do with Queensland, is a way of getting into the news at a time while, the focus of the people in power is, squarely on their performance in terms of keeping coronavirus at bay.
Yes. Okay. Now, speaking of Victorian premiers and piling on Victorian premiers, the media love themselves a bit of Jeff Kennett, and Jeff Kennett loves a little bit of media attention as well, Jake. So
he does.
Tell us a little bit about who Jeff Kennett was before we launch into this one.
Well, Jeff Kennett was the former Premier of Victoria for a number of years.
1992 to 1999.
Nice work.
Thanks.
And, it was during the same time that John Howard held the federal parliament. There was a tremendous amount of love flowing to Victoria. A tremendous amount of growth occurred in Victoria during that time.
Is he a Liberal or a Labourin?
He, from memory, is a Lib.
Oh, let's have a look. He was in office. I'll have a look. I'll check that out, Jake. Yes.
He was a Lib.
You would think was he a Lib?
I thought he was a Lib.
Yes, Liberal Party.
Yes, and from memory, he also held for a particular part of time. He set it up so that the treasurer was from the opposition. So he while he had a majority government, he was all about getting the right people into the right jobs. And was able to sort it out. So essentially, he had people from the opposition running in a coalition to support good governance.
Well, Jake, if there's anything that gets me going, it's when people in the opposition have people are in power. Anyway, yes.
When people in the opposition are in power. Yeah.
That's right. I love it. Now, okay, so Jeff Kennett, what's he been up to? What's he doing at the moment? He loves a bit of media attention. He
does,
there.
Yeah. He is the CEO, I think, for one of the football codes, or for one of the clubs.
Okay.
He's a larger than life individual. He's constantly brought in for commentary on various things, and he came out this week to say that Daniel Andrews, the current state leader, quote, cannot survive the coronavirus crisis and will step down within months. Quote, I think Daniel is preparing to exit, he said during an interview. Quote, I think he'll try to get the coronavirus under control, hopefully by Christmas, and then I think he'll stand down and move on.
Why?
How about that? Well, he's, essentially...
Doesn't seem like Daniel at all. Doesn't seem like the Daniel I've come to know and love anyway.
No, exactly. Well, interestingly enough, when Daniel was being elected, he was adamantly wanting to be known as Dan. I want to be known as Cool Dan. Call me Cool Dan.
Nah, Daniel's...
but no, he's all about the Daniel now. He's
evolved into Daniel, hasn't he?
Well, I wonder whether he's like me. Like, if I'm in trouble, I know that I'm going to hear Jacob, Giovanni, David, Farr-Wharton in that string. And so I just wonder whether, him... wanting to be referred to as Daniel Andrews suggests that he acknowledges that he's in trouble.
I think so.
He wants to hear his full name.
One of the things I love about sort of evolving, especially with this podcast and stuff, is that you can start to see how dedicated the politicians are to their cause, and you start to think about, gosh, they get up every single morning, they go through the motions, they say, right, what's happening today? What decisions do I need to make? Let's go and do that. Let's face the media. Let's face let's face the music. They've got families. They've got hopes and dreams of their own. They do all this stuff, but they keep working. They keep working really hard. So I think it's a bit of a shame if the conversation turns to, the fact that he can't handle it and that he's going to exit, because he's just been so committed to Victorians, I think.
Look, I completely agree. I'm not sure that it's about him not being able to take it. I think it's more about him taking responsibility, particularly for what occurred during the. This week, for example, he came out to say, he was questioned on the whole. Are you concerned for the investigation going on around the hotel quarantine program? And his response was, "I am, quote, accountable for any mistakes that occurred."
That's right.
So I don't think it's that he can't hack it. I think it's more that he feels responsible for the fact that instead of for example, public people and health officials being used to manage the hotel quarantine process, that private security guards who were potentially underpaid and selected a day before and given virtually zero training, etc., led to that scenario where the coronavirus was not only allowed to spread but allowed to proliferate throughout the community, thanks to those various vectors of security guards.
Yeah.
And probably other means as well. So I think he feels that he is obviously I'm reading into stuff that he hasn't said, but I would assume that he feels quite responsible for that program, particularly because there were public health officials who said, guys, you really should not be using private contractors in this, particularly private security contractors in this type of circumstance, and that was prior to the hotel quarantine program being enacted and during the initial little while of that. So, it was penny pinching that got him into trouble. And, I feel that this is a contrite response of, I'm responsible. So I think, it is possible that Jeff Kennett is, reading something into this that is maybe along the lines of being correct. But I also think, he's the strongest person in that party. He's a former health minister. He is the right person, at least at the moment, and we'll just have to see what happens. But certainly coronavirus is going to be with us, beyond Christmas. So should Dan Andrews, I would suggest.
All right, Jake. Well, speaking of the future and thinking about, I'm sure, I'm confident that history will remember Dan Andrews in a positive light for the most part. For the most part, Jake. Generally speaking, feel free to email us at thepouchthepodcast@gmail.com if you feel very strongly about Daniel Andrews doing a horrific job.
Yeah, or if you're just a little bit upset with the fact that we have political leaders with two first names.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that just drives me crazy.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't know. Anyway, okay. So I was going to say I didn't know Morrison was a first name, but anyway, then I couldn't decide whether it was or not. Morrison. If you met a Morrison, would you feel a bit?
Oh, yeah.
Who's this? This is Morrison.
Yeah.
Is that a first name?
Morrison.
Morris.
No, he likes to be referred to by his surname.
Steve.
This is John Steve.
This is Morrison Steve. I love it. Now, speaking of the future, Jake, and how future generations will remember things. We maybe don't have the best reputation, depending on who you ask, for our future, climate change, our future actions to do with climate change. However, in amongst all of the announcements to do with coronavirus and funding and not funding and job keeping and child caring, the government has provided funding for a nationwide rollout.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, of electric vehicle charging stations.
Oh, wow. Now, this is exciting.
It is.
Do you know why I'm excited, Jake? Well, hang on.
Okay.
The Google Maps now shows charging stations.
Yep.
So I think this is very exciting.
I have found recently that I shouldn't use Google Maps. I should just use the Apple Maps thing because it takes me in all of the...
You are the first person on the planet to say it.
I know. I realised that. I realised that Apple Maps is not a well-regarded application. But let me tell you...
No, to the point where Apple have said, don't use it.
Well, yesterday I found myself on the moon after taking a wrong turn thanks to Google Maps. No, it's an interesting one. Yeah, look, it's really good that they've decided to do that. It's just less than $1 million, so it's not it's not a massive investment, but it is an important one. They've essentially said they've got these AC chargers. They typically cost around $3,000 for the wall box and installation, and they offer a fully subsidised for the trial participants 7 kilowatts of charging power to residential customers and 22 kilowatts for fleet operators, and it's going to be installed around New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland and South Australia for all of those individuals with electric cars.
Right. Fred Stokes says, I thought electric vehicles were the end of the weekend. Does that mean like you can't go very far?
Well, I mean, yes, it's true that you can't go a tremendous distance.
We see them up the Blue Mountains all the time, so that doesn't bother me.
There's a dude with a Tesla around the corner, and yeah, look, I do see them around quite often. I think from memory, the range of the Tesla is something like like 300 odd kilometers. So I mean that's reasonable. It's enough to go to somewhere and get back. But, quite often, if you're going to go, quite a distance, you're probably going to stay at that place where you've driven quite a distance for a little while. So
they're in some car parks and stuff too, aren't they? Like,
yeah.
Well, not the Teslas, the chargers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, that's a brief little segue, Jake.
Yeah, a nice little good news story, you might say.
Yeah, maybe we should have saved that.
For the good news episode.
Now, which one would you like to do now, Jake? Do you want to do story 5? Do you want to whack that one out? Was there another one that you'd like to? Let's
do did you say we had some listener comments?
Yeah, look, we did, Jake. We received an email. Now, this is a follow-up email from Annette Scarlett, who messaged us a couple of weeks ago. She messaged us about trying to find out exactly what the concrete things were about the Black Lives Matter protests and all that sort of stuff. So she said she fully supports it. She understands the situation, but that she would just wanted to know about what were the concrete things. We went through a few of those concrete things. We talked about the fact that that there was the what do you call it, the closing the gap. We talked about the fact that what's the one that you talk about, the heart.
Oh, yeah, the Uluru Statement from the Heart?
Uluru Statement from the Heart. We talked about a raft of other things.
The Indigenous deaths in custody.
Yeah, all those that report with recommendations.
Yep.
Some really concrete things that people want to see enacted. She's messaged and said that she commented on the Black Lives Matter. She was concerned the focus was on awareness rather than a lack of positive directions and solutions. Then she said that she loved the fact that the government released this Closing the Gap, the refreshed
new
report,
targets, yep.
Yeah, which was tabled last week. The 16 targets are interesting. However, she suggests a focus on the trajectory graphs. They're fascinating. They provide a clear distinction between Indigenous and non-Indigenous positions, but it is worth noting the trajectory is very conservative for the next 13 years. Also, with our present economic situation, how will that be financed? I don't know. I think probably more conservative might be better. That's just obviously a guess on my part. They obviously thought it was better to go down a bit of a more conservative path as well, given the 2031 targets and given the fact that they sort of, I think they failed on a lot of the recent, on a lot of the other targets. Well, obviously,
yeah, almost all.
Be refreshing.
I mean, successive governments have failed on it.
Yeah.
And as you say, and as we discussed in last week's show, there is no new funding.
Yeah.
been suggested. I mean, part of this was the Indigenous leaders, the Coalition of Peaks, which is the big Indigenous elder organisation, has made up of a number of different organisations. They have come up with these targets for the government to work towards. But I suppose the next stage is that they've defined the what, if you like, what we are striving towards. And, the next thing is to understand how we actually, so the how, I suppose. And part of the how is once they've got the how, they'll need to start writing, I would assume, business cases to understand, what those programs that would make up the how, what they are going to entail and what they are going to require in terms of funding.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. All right. So thank you very much for that, Annette Scarlett. Thank you for that, keeping those comments coming in. We do love the fact that we get to revisit some of these stories as well to see how they've evolved and changed over time. Fred Stokes has put a couple of comments in the comment section as well, and he's also he's said that the electric vehicle line about the end of the weekend was a line from the LNP from last election. So sounds like something they would say. He's also put a link to a Guardian article in there, so check that out in the comments section below. Jake.
Hello, Jake.
JobKeeper. Speaking of things keeping on,
yes,
is the government, the Morrison government has overhauled the eligibility requirements for the JobKeeper wage subsidy. Only 3 weeks after cutting it, I'm guessing this has to do with Victoria and not so much New South Wales 9 cases.
Well, I mean, Gladys is clearly doing the job that Gladys needs to be doing. And as a consequence, you've been able to get a hold of or handle on the groups of clusters that have popped up around the place.
Yeah, look, and I think to that point too, just in case, because our luck with the podcast lately, given how quickly the news changes, hasn't been that great. So we release an episode and then something very dramatic happens.
Yeah.
So just in case, I think we should re-record this bit as well, just as a bit of a shock, in case, like for when New South Wales announces.
Yeah, it's a real pity
there are
that
746 cases or something.
It's a real pity that Gladys wasn't able to get a handle on that.
I know, exactly. She's doing a shocking job.
Yeah,
hey?
Yeah. Look, I think she's doing a great job. It's just unfortunate that her health minister let her down.
I know. And her whole party has resigned. I can't believe it. Believe it.
Yeah.
and
but,
just, Daniel Andrews is now the premier of both Victoria and New South Wales.
I mean, who would have seen that coming? It's crazy. He doesn't even live in New South Wales, and yet he's been pulled in as the rescue. He literally choppered in.
I know.
And said, "Get in the chopper
and
get to the chopper." That's what he said.
And Jeff Kennett was right. He's retiring in Byron Bay now. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, hey? I know, right?
It's been a crazy
and
wild
Byron
day
Bay has
politics.
moved to Queensland. I mean, it's just this string of really, really weird and crazy events.
Okay, excellent. I'm glad we've got that out of the way. Good. I'm sure no matter what happens today, I'll be able to edit some chunk of that to be relevant.
We're covered.
Because the problem is I have the news on sometimes. I have a television next to me and I have the news on while I'm editing the podcast. So while I'm editing the podcast, it's literally changing on the news. I'm like, we only recorded an hour ago. Anyway.
The story's changed entirely.
It is what it is, as Donald Trump would say. So...
Yeah, so the Morrison government has overhauled its eligibility requirements for the JobKeeper wage subsidy only 3 weeks after cutting the payment in an attempt to save businesses and jobs at risk because of the deteriorating outlook in Victoria. So the changes mean that businesses and not-for-profits will only have to show a fall in turnover in the September quarter compared with a comparable period in 2019, rather than having to show declines in the June and September quarters in order to requalify for the subsidy after the 28th of September. Because this whole thing was around.
Hang on. You said a lot of numbers there.
Yep.
So let me just go through it, right? So I have a business.
Yep. First of all, congrats.
Thanks. It's called the Pouch.
Sells Scott Morrison posters and Jacinda Ardern earrings.
Yes. And we run at a significant loss. Now... okay, so I have a business. I made $100 this time last year for this quarter because we run in quarters, small business, right? So then if I have a fall in turnover for the same quarter this year, I can qualify?
So yes, absolutely. So the changes were going to mean that you were going to have to show that you had made less this year at the same time than you had last year.
Right.
What the new changes are is that all you have to do is show that your entire quarter. So not just that you've made less than you did in the same month last year, but that you've made less over the quarter than you did last year.
Right.
So it allows you to essentially say, say you earned $1,000, in July last year, you don't have to show that you've made less. You can show essentially that you've made less than you would have over the quarter.
Right.
Yeah. So essentially, it's allowing a greater margin of error.
I see. Okay. All right. So rather than just like if I happen to have got lucky in September or whatever, and I made the same amount as last year, then I'd be sort of a bit stuck.
Exactly, and a lot of the industries that are suffering, most profoundly are those service industries that and the tourism industries, etc., that are seasonal. That are reliant on school holidays, which do fall around those big months. So if you were locked into showing a fall over a comparable period that was not comparable, essentially because everyone's locked down, then this is a way of getting around that.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. All right. So, all right. That's very nice of them that they're reviewing it, aren't they? They're reviewing it on a very regular basis at the moment. I sort of I'm struggling to keep up with all of the changes.
Yep.
I know that the 250,000 workers are meant to be affected in Victoria. I don't know whether that 250,000 is the number that's going to be laid off or the number who are going to be accessing JobKeeper or whatever. But I know that 250,000 workers were meant to be impacted in Victoria alone.
Well, essentially, that's the number of people that aren't allowed to go to their job because they are not classified as the essential workers.
Right.
And there's different ways for this to be happening. A lot of people have been arguing for a while that instead of having to access your sick or holiday leave, you should have some form of pandemic leave. It just so happens that if you want to access that may be in the form of JobKeeper, which for some people may be more, for some people may be less. For example, I don't think I could survive on JobKeeper, but it's one of those things that maybe it is a better option than having to take or having to slice away a chunk of my leave.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the options are there for those people, which is good. And I know that they've also expanded their the pandemic leave payments as well. So now that's sort of to any state. It's either all state and territories or
no. So right now it's just Victoria.
Yeah.
I thought
because
that
they've declared a state of disaster.
Correct, state of emergency. I think you're right. It is a state of disaster. But I thought I heard something about New South Wales as well that may also be considered. But essentially, it is if you've had a test, because the thing here is people have been going to work essentially while sick.
Yeah.
Or they've been going to work after having a test, or they've been going, I'll just duck across the road to the shops and then I'll go and quarantine. I just want to make sure that I've got enough food to quarantine with.
Yeah.
So the money is there. This fund has been enabled to essentially say the second that you get tested or the second that you are, asked to quarantine because you've got a runny nose or whatever it is, whatever your symptoms are, the second that you've been asked to quarantine, do it.
Yes.
You can access that payment, but only if you self-quarantine.
What I'd like to know, Jake, is if any of our listeners have had to access any of these payments, if they've had to access, a leave pen for being tested or for being tested positive or anything like that, I'd love it if they emailed us at thepouchthepodcast@gmail.com or one of our many social media platforms. I want to know what the process is like. I want to know how easy it is, to get access to this funding, because I think that plays a part in it, right? I think if you're sick and you decide that you're going to go to work, but part of the reason might be that you're worried about how long it's going to take to actually fill in these forms to get, how long do I get this payment for? I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got all these bills to pay. How long do I actually have to wait for this money to appear in my bank account? Gareth Strystamanis has messaged and instantly, gosh, this is, technology. Has it gone too far? He said he's been stuck down for 6 weeks' work and he's on JobKeeper. He's losing a bunch of dollars each month by not being on his full pay. It's going to be tough considering I just moved into his own place. That's exactly right. It's such a, it's such an odd amount. It's great that there's some money there, but it's such an odd amount of money given people's lifestyles and the lifestyles that we've become accustomed to, and the commitments that we've made to pay businesses back. So it's one thing to sort of go, well, I sort of own some stuff that doesn't really matter, but it's another thing to be saying, well, I actually made a commitment to pay my car, and I made a commitment to pay my mortgage, and I've made a commitment to these places who are going to be a lot less sympathetic come time to pay those bills. So yeah, I am curious to know if any of our listeners have had to access, any of these little emergency funds or something like that. What is that process like? We could even get you on the show to discuss that.
We'd love
just
to hear
as a
your
short
experience.
segment. Yeah. thepatchthepodcast@gmail.com. If you've got any stories like that or any of our social media platforms. And Jake checks those very regularly, don't you, Jake?
Yep, I'm a prolific social media-ite.
All right. Anything else you want to add to any of that one, Jake?
Just the total dollar figure. The Treasurer has estimated that it will cost roughly $15.6 billion, which notably. We're getting ever so slightly closer to that $60 billion, amount of money that the government overestimated in the initial, I suppose estimations around JobKeeper and Job Seeker. So, these programs are great in that they are being importantly reactionary. Sometimes reactionary is a bit of a pejorative term, but they are meeting the needs as they arise, and I would suggest that is reactionary. And they are costing a bit of money, but importantly, we do have a little bit of a buffer in that we had budgeted for, I think it was $120 billion, of which $60 billion of that was deemed not necessary because of the overestimation at the time.
Yes,
but yes, we are chipping away at that amount of money. We are coming ever closer.
Yep. Good luck with that too, Gareth. I sympathise with you. We've just moved house, and the little costs associated with moving a house, not to mention just the mental stress of moving a house, and it takes you a year. It takes you a year just to get used to a house and just to get used to where to put your Tupperware and all that sort of stuff. Anyway,
in the bin is the answer to that.
Well, no, it's not, Jake. Just talked about the environment. But anyway, so I do sympathise with you, and I hope that that works out too. And I hope that the lifelines that are out there for everyone are enough to see us through. And we're all doing our little bit. Each one of us has had to make a little sacrifice here and there, except for Apple, who are like nearly worth $2 trillion or something.
Yeah. It's because of the maps. It just works so well.
Jake, are there any other stories you want to touch on?
I think you mentioned that there was one other email that had been sent in.
No, just that one. Just the one. I did say a couple. You're absolutely right that I said a couple, and I was kind of hoping you wouldn't latch onto that, but you did. I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind touching on this UNSQ one. Just as a bit of a side note. I know you've got some family coming over, Jake. So tell me to rack off if you need to. But
no, we're good.
It fascinates me the influence. So this story is called UNSW under fire for deleting social media posts critical of China, and this particular article is an ABC News by Max Walden, and it says Federal Education Minister Dan Tehan has urged the University of New South Wales to protect freedom of speech after its media team deleted posts which drew an online backlash from Chinese students. UNSW's official Twitter account deleted posts quoting one of its academics speaking about Hong Kong. It was recently announced 500 jobs would go at UNSW due to loss in international student revenue, which is a story across the board for many universities.
Yeah,
the university
if not
has
all.
strong business and research ties with mainland China. Now, this fascinates me, this whole situation, because the influence of China is really gripping Australia, isn't it? And this idea that that we are also beholden to some of these, what would you call them? Like,
Institutions.
well, it's more like we're beholden to. They're trying to make us beholden to the same.
Yeah, we're
sort
beholden
of-
to
of-
sentiment, essentially.
of the same sort of. What do you call it? Like censorship.
Yep.
Laws, censorship rules. They're trying to say, hey, you need to delete these. You need to get rid of these.
Well, is it censorship or is it diplomacy? Because I suppose the thing is, we have a situation where the federal government was almost goaded into having a position statement against China because of a few government backbenchers that decided that they would speak up into the media, and as a consequence, the federal government has had a position. It decided that it would go ahead with the request for a probe into coronavirus, etc. We've discussed this a lot, but essentially, it had consequences. It had consequences in terms of trade, and it will probably have long-lasting consequences in terms of trade, diplomacy, etc. Over the coming years. China historically has never necessarily been a country to quickly forget slights against its nation. So it is something that we will probably be feeling for years to come. Now, in terms of that's the federal government. Now, these are I hesitate calling them private institutions because they do receive a tremendous amount of coin from the government purse in order to educate both the Australian public, and the private side of that is their international students.
Yes.
So the fact that they rely. And I cannot understate that enough. I cannot overstate that enough. They rely on international funds, on full fee-paying students in order to fund their faculty, in order to fund their research. Without those international students, they are really in a lot of trouble. Like, they're in a lot of trouble already, but they are in so much trouble if they, if the private side of their institution, i.e. their full fee paying international students, if they are put offside. So if they can improve that situation, I suppose, by way of diplomacy, by way of smoothing the way that they talk about, the country's, policies that are enacted that, send them lots of students, maybe that's a way of addressing that. But it's also kowtowing.
I think, like you've just blown my mind a little bit, Jake. Like, you've given me something to think about. My overarching feeling is that it's still really bad. Like, it's still, they're universities. Like, they're meant to be places of free thought and meant to be places of where you can discuss things and you can discuss any topic. That no topic should be taboo. And so I think that just needs to be part of the deal. I don't know. I don't know what's riding on the fact. Like, okay, well, if you have an institution that's willing to ban tweets that are critical of Hong Kong, but they decide not to, and then they go under. Well, I get the feeling that educational institution was pretty useless anyway, because they weren't discussing free thought. They weren't upholding any of the reasons that we have any of these institutions in the first place.
Yeah, look, I love that premise. I suppose the free thinking, free discussion, etc., is more about the students. I suppose it's about, I suppose, providing concepts and context to students and giving them a safe space where they can explore free thought. But I suppose the vice chancellor above, vice chancellor and above, the faculty potentially as well, are all implicated in the business of how do we make this work into the future? How do we make this business, this business survive? So while I completely agree with you that, on the face of it, it's bad that we are censoring ourselves,
It is bad.
just in order to make money. I don't necessarily begrudge these institutions that are deciding to go the diplomatic route instead of the agitation route.
Yeah, I think I do.
It's just,
But where does it end? Like, where do you draw the line?
Exactly right. It is a slippery slope. It is one of those things that, we will invariably get ourselves into more and more trouble if we remain on this slippery slope, if we continue to kowtow. But equally, maybe institutions do need to do that in order to just survive.
Yeah, but is surviving the main thing here?
Yeah,
I mean, wouldn't free speech and the idea of not having international foreign governments interfering in our own affairs a bit bigger? I don't know.
I agree with you on the face of it, but I suppose I understand the strategy that they're enacting.
Yes,
if that makes sense. Because
yes.
Sorry, you go.
No, it's just not something that I've thought about. Like that particular angle isn't something that I've thought about before. It's an interesting angle.
Yeah, I mean, on the face of it, I agree with you. From a purist perspective, I completely agree with you. It's wrong that we censor ourselves, particularly our academics. Like, the University of New South Wales has a tremendous number of, international and foreign affairs individuals, academics, I should say, very learned individuals who understand both the history, the context, etc., the economics behind things, and they understand that the situation is escalating. It's getting worse for both people, for economies, etc., and that we need to be speaking out about these things. And then you've got on the other side of this the business side of the university saying, "Hey, academics, we know you're great at your job, and the reason that we're good at the reason that we are thought of as a good international university is because we have great academics who are willing to speak their mind, who are willing to publish important research. But now isn't the time."
Yeah,
we need a couple. We need a couple more. I understand the strategy, but they may, invariably, to use an adage, they might be cutting off their nose to spite their face.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Like, where does it end, and what is that? Because you mentioned that, particularly academics being censored is not a great thing. I just think that everyone being censored is not a great thing. Like, we need those fresh voices of students who aren't quite academics yet to be able to be having those discussions freely and without worrying about consequences, particularly when the influence is coming from foreign governments. Because they certainly have opinions when we decide to get involved in their politics.
You're absolutely right. I mean, personally, I'm not really a free speech purist because it does have its sort of drawbacks when taken to the extremes. Yeah. But I would say that it's important that we, recognise, and maybe to go back on a little bit of what I've said. It's probably important.
You can do that, Jake. It's a safe space.
Well, yeah, exactly. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's important that we recognise that the reason that someone might be attracted to particularly an international student. The reason that an international student might be attracted to a particular university is likely to be the caliber of academics and the caliber of learning and teaching, etc., provided by that institution. So by censoring that institution or by censoring that academic, then they are potentially doing that thing that, they're cutting off their nose to spite their face, and potentially putting themselves in a position where they may not be able to attract the higher caliber of student because they are censoring that particular academic. I don't know.
Well, it
it's an
certainly
interesting
makes me not want to go to those particular universities. We did touch on a story a little while ago about UQ Senator, as he calls himself, Drew Pavlo. And we reached out to him. He said he might come on the show in a little bit. He's just a bit tied under at the moment, which is fair enough, because he was under fire for being very critical of China in his role with UQ, and UQ ended up actually removing him from his post. I think he was like their equivalent to suspended.
Yep.
He wasn't allowed to study there or be a member of the Senate for a year or something like that. So this is big. Like, this has real implications here in Australia, and this is certainly got all the signs that China's tentacles are reaching out, Jake, across the sea, past our naval ships that are doing war games there, and reaching out and really having an impact here
into our universities.
Yeah, because if I tell you what, if I was studying at UQ or UNSW, I'd really probably have to reconsider my position, because I just think that universities in particular are meant to be bastions for free speech, and this is just getting a bit too far. I think this idea that China has so much of an influence here that we can't even say
or any
things about Hong
country
Kong.
really, or any company
That's
or
right.
whatever.
I mean,
suppose
look at the influence that Fiji has on our.
freebirding.
Yeah, that's right. There are their cheap flights,
Yeah.
Jake, trying to keep
you're
people studying so that they can get their cheap flights over to Fiji. How dare they?
I get it. I do.
Interesting discussion. Interesting to think that maybe there might be a few casualties in this situation. Like Drew and a couple of others who have been suspended for their actions around criticising China here in Australia, which just shouldn't be happening, Jake.
No, I couldn't agree more.
But you heard it here first, or third, depending on
the order in which you receive news.
Yeah, that's right. Depending on how informed you are.
Exactly.
Well, Jake, you've got some visitors coming over in a little while, so I better let you go.
They're here, but we can do the wrap up.
Get them on the show. Get them on the show. Hey, we have some live comments.
No,
Don't do that.
He's not looking so good today.
Who?
My brother. He's got like a really ugly beanie. I'm out.
Does he listen to the show?
I don't want him on the show. No.
Well, I was going to say, I hope not, because you just called him, well, maybe not ugly. The beanie was ugly. The beanie was ugly. All right, Jake. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today about all these elements that are happening during our week. The news is happening so fast and so frequent and so fresh that it really is great just to be able to stop for a few minutes and have a think about things. Jake, when our listeners have also finished having a think about things, what would you like them to do?
I'd like for them to rate, review, and subscribe. Not necessarily in that order. If they subscribe first and then rate and review, that'd be fine too.
Yep.
But by reviewing and rating us, you give other people the ability to find us much more easily.
Absolutely. And welcome to any of the newer listeners who have come from our interview with Politics Over Coffee last week.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Certainly not the last little interaction we'll have with them or their fans. So
no, it was the last for me. Don't want to.
Done. Mic drop.
Love it. It was
Obama mic drop.
fantastic. It was fantastic.
So welcome one and all. If you've come from there, let us know via the pouch, the podcast at gmail.com, if that's how you found us. And if you've got any comments that you'd like us to read out on the show, you can do so. If you want to share the love far and wide, you can tell your friends, families and foes to head to thepouchthepodcast.com, where they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice and subscribe that way. It's been a real pleasure, Jake.
It's been a real pleasure, Greg.
And stay safe,
Yeah, out there.
You guys have got no cases up there again.
Nah, well, we've got a couple of active cases. We just don't have any new community transmission.
No. Some concerns, but you've got 40,000 concerns, but no actual cases. So
we remain alert, but not alarmed.
Exactly,
as Ray Martin once said.
Exactly. It'd be interesting to see whether we've got one case or 9 cases or 12 cases today here in
or 742.
Gareth Strauss-Demana said they didn't like you either, Jake. So cop that.
It's only fair. No, I love those.
We'll bring that up on the screen. Look, we didn't like you either. That's nice. Hey? One of the few comments we got today. It's very lovely. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye. Mic drop. I can't get that out to mic drop it. I gotta figure it out.
Yeah, I'm not going to drop this.
Whoa, it hovers.
Wow, how'd you